Let's get started with Paul. Paul asks a good question. It's a question that shows up a lot. It used to show up every year at Perform Better, and frankly, it gets stupid after a while. But it's a good question. There is no, I don't know of a country on earth that demands you can only do one thing. But if there was, let's get the question from Paul. In one of your older articles, you said, if a 50-plus man asked me that question, if you could only do one lift, what would it be? I would answer one-arm presses. As a 50-plus man, I am interested if you would still answer that same question the same way. Yeah, I'm a huge believer. The reason I like single-arm overhead presses, especially as you age, and in most cases for men, I would suggest either standing or that half-kneeling position. So if you're kneeling on the ground, that's both knees. Half-kneeling is when you have one knee down, and of course the other is in that kind of extended lunge position. What's great about half-kneeling is it does stretch out, at least for me and everybody I work with, the hip flexor, and it demands a certain kind of rigidity in the core and in the glutes so you can handle that weight. But I would, Paul, I would still stick with the single arm press as if you could only do one exercise. I have a rough right shoulder because of discus throwing all those years. I threw 41 years at a high competitive level. It's a lot of years, and it's not that discus throwing once or twice is bad for you, but 15,000 throws a year for 41 years, and it starts to add up. But when I press with one arm, since the shoulders, I always tell people that they have independent suspension systems. If you're doing two hands, some of us will notice we get some neck tension. Some people hurt here when they're doing barbell presses. They'll get weird places. But if you can do the independent suspension, single side, a lot of those issues disappear. Is there a perfect exercise? Yeah, when I was young, I thought the clean and press was the answer to all questions. Later, it became the bench press, and I was wrong on that. But I look back at the wisdom of 13-year-old Danny John, and I think he's a pretty smart kid. I think I've told you this before. In my journal, I have a note, and I'm 14, 1971, that if all I did as an adult 50 years from now was squat, snatch, and clean and press, I'd be just fine. And this is not an exaggeration. Literally, my workout today, I did my glute loops, I did my original strength, I did squat snatches, and then I did presses. So thank you. Hats off to little Danny in 1971 for that insight. But yeah, Paul, I would still stick with that. When I work with athletes, one of the things I try to do now, my training formula is it's called AIT. If you're from the Vietnam era, that meant advanced infantry training. But in my world, it means accumulation, intensification, transformation. So when I'm working with a thrower, I will teach them all the power lifts, all the Highland Games, all the Olympic lifts, as much kettlebell work as we can, get in logically. Sometimes it's not so much our ability to teach, but if I'm teaching at a university or school, if they don't have good kettlebells or a situation where we're doing it doesn't always work. I can teach a whole bunch of kettlebell stuff out in the field, but some things it is nice to do some kettlebell work inside in a controlled environment. Oh gosh, we teach them strongman stuff, all the bodybuilding movements, tons of calisthenics work, tons and tons of lots and lots and lots of things. And then once you get to a certain level, we start to cast things out. My really good thrower, Emily, last year, all she did was snatch, and she squat snatches and suitcase carries, because where she was in her career, it was time to really intensify her throwing and her ability to whip weights overhead. Transformation has two meanings. One, it might be like when an American high school football player goes from football to wrestling to track and field, or whatever. It can also be when an athlete goes from playing at a high end to retirement. You need a smart training program to go from the center of attention for the whole world, like a soccer football player, an Olympic athlete. You need a transition period. You need a transformation period. And then in another case, there's transformations where, especially if I'm working, a while, say plus 5 years with somebody, it's time to almost cast out everything. And then, it becomes that mantra I use, throwers throw, jumpers jump, sprinters sprint. You just have to be, total focus on just what you're trying to do. You're transforming into a thrower. I was able to hear the late, great Charlie Francis speak. I think it was his last workshop. Someone told me it was, and I can't verify if that's true. It was here in Utah, and he was fabulous. And one of the things I really got away from Charlie Francis, the great Canadian sprint coach, is, when you're working with people who are running as fast as humans can possibly run, there's no room for a lot of other stuff. No one cares how many pull-ups you do if you run a 9-700 meters. Probably nobody cares how many pull-ups you do anyway. But yeah, so I would not want you to just pick one exercise, but imagine this. You had a life filled with games and sports. You danced, you laughed, you played tag and hide and go seek, and you played, competitive sports. And then you started to slide into that next phase of your life, and maybe you got kids and a job, and then you start training in your home gym or the gym, and you start picking specific exercises to fit your wants to and keep your cardiovascular health where it needs to be. You want to stay lean as you can, but as muscular as you can, and you'd like to look good. And then as you transition into that plus 50 age, in my case, it was like it just all opened up. I had so much more time than I used to have. But maybe, you might find yourself on a trip, on a vacation, I don't know. Sometimes when I drive cross country, I bring kettlebells with me, and the exercise I do the most is single kettlebell presses, because that makes sense to me when I travel. So the answer to your question is I would still say single kettlebell press, but make sure you keep everything in perspective. And if I can say one thing about what I find online, perspective is a vanishing species. All right. Hey, thank you. Fun question, Paul, and thanks for reading my older stuff.